In a world where so many people feel unseen, lost, and overlooked, sometimes all it takes is one person, one moment, to change everything. This is the story of Isaiah Mitchell, a boy once starving on the streets of Chicago, and Victoria Hayes, the young girl who shared her lunch with him when no one else cared. A simple act of kindness, a sandwich, was all it took for a bond to form that would last a lifetime. But promises made in desperation aren't always easy to keep, especially when life changes in ways we can't predict. Isaiah grew up, became successful, and left his past behind, but he never forgot that promise. He never forgot the girl who saved him. This is a story of redemption, of hope, of a promise kept, and of the power of kindness to change lives. It's not just about getting rich or finding love, it's about what happens when we choose to care. In the next few minutes, you'll hear a story that will inspire you to believe that you matter, that your actions matter, and that giving up is never an option. No matter how many years pass or how far you've come, it's never too late to make a difference. This story is for anyone who's ever wondered if their kindness would matter, for anyone who's felt lost or alone, and for anyone who believes in the power of a promise kept. If you've ever dreamed of changing the world, even just one life at a time, this story is for you. Are you ready to hear how one small act of kindness can change everything? Keep listening. The best part of the story is yet to come. Before we jump into the story of love, redemption, and community, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps us grow, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. The cold wind bit at Isaiah's skin as he crouched behind a trash can in the dimming light of an unforgiving Chicago afternoon. His stomach, hollow and aching, growled loudly, but the sound was lost in the distant hum of the city. The last few days had blurred together, a fevered haze of hunger, exhaustion, and the quiet, unrelenting realization that survival, not living, was all he could manage. Isaiah, just 10 years old, was as much a shadow as a person, his thin frame nearly hidden under layers of ragged clothing. His face was gaunt, his eyes dull and vacant, reflecting the crushing weight of loneliness and hunger. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, and every step felt like walking through quicksand. His ribs ached with every shallow breath, and his hands trembled from the cold and weakness. He had nowhere to go. The street was his home, or at least it had become that way in the last 2 weeks. A series of foster homes had come and gone, each family either rejecting him or unable to deal with his grief-stricken silence. His mother had passed away a few weeks prior, and the pain had carved a deep hole in his heart, one that nothing could fill. Isaiah sat outside Lincoln Elementary, staring longingly at the children playing on the other side of the fence. They were laughing, eating their lunches so full of joy, of innocence. He could almost smell the peanut butter sandwiches, the apples, the juice boxes they had. How he longed for something to fill the ache in his belly, to taste something other than stale air and the bitterness of hunger. A teacher had shooed him away earlier that morning, warning him to leave the kids alone, but he couldn't move. His legs were too weak. The cold, the hunger, everything had become a dull throb in the back of his mind, and he didn't care anymore. He just wanted to feel something, anything. Through the thin fence, his eyes met hers. She was a small girl, not much older than him, with dark braided hair and a face full of compassion. She stood there, watching him, her eyes not filled with fear or judgment, but curiosity. She wasn't afraid. Her name was Victoria, and she had been raised by her grandmother. They lived in subsidized housing. Their meals were simple, often just rice and beans. But Victoria had been taught early on that sharing what you had, no matter how little, was one of the most important things you could do. Victoria hesitated, her friends calling her, urging her to join them, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the boy who was staring back at her through the fence. His eyes were clouded, hollow. There was something in them that spoke of pain, of hunger, of loss. And in that moment, Victoria knew she couldn't walk away. She had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in her lunchbox, along with an apple, a juice box, and a small bag of crackers. It was all she had, her entire lunch for the day, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. "We always share what we got." Her hand trembled as she opened the lunchbox and walked to the fence. "Hey," she said softly, "I'm Victoria. You look hungry." Isaiah's eyes flickered as he blinked, but he didn't respond. He couldn't find his voice, not with the crushing emptiness inside him. But the way she looked at him like he mattered moved something deep inside him, and he reached out with shaky hands, grabbing the sandwich from her. He ate it in 4 bites, barely pausing to chew, his eyes wide with disbelief. The apple followed. The juice, too, emptied in seconds. Victoria watched him, her heart breaking as she saw the desperation in his every movement. When he finished, his eyes met hers, wet with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She nodded. "You're welcome." Victoria had to leave then, but as she turned, she glanced back at him once more. Isaiah sat there, clutching the empty juice box, staring at her. He hadn't spoken much, but the look in his eyes said everything. The bell rang, and Victoria walked back to her friends, but her heart remained behind the fence. She would see him again tomorrow. She promised herself she would bring in lunch again, because someone needed to see him. Someone needed to help him. And so she did. Every day for the next 6 months, Victoria made the same choice. She gave him her lunch, each sandwich, each apple, each drink. No one asked her to do it. No one thanked her, but she did it anyway. And each time, Isaiah's eyes softened, the hunger in them turning to something else. Hope. The promise came on the last day of winter, the day she had to leave for good. Isaiah had been so sick, barely able to stand, but he had hung on, knowing she would come. He had waited. And when he could finally speak again, he made a promise, his voice shaky and weak but full of sincerity. "I'll marry you when I'm rich," he said, his hands trembling as he tied half of a red ribbon around her wrist, a gesture so simple, yet so deeply meaningful. Victoria laughed softly, brushing back tears. "You'll be rich?" She teased, a small smile on her face despite the sadness in her heart. "I will," he said, his voice unwavering. "And when I am, I'll come back for you." She tied the other half of the ribbon around his wrist, pressing it into his skin as she whispered, "I'll be waiting." And then he was gone. Victoria never forgot him. Neither did Isaiah. If you're moved by this story, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this powerful journey. We want to know where you're watching from, so drop us a comment below. Let's spread this message of hope and love to everyone. Isaiah Mitchell lived high up in a fancy apartment, looking out over Lake Michigan. But as beautiful as the view was, it didn't matter to him anymore. The gold in the water, the sun shining over the lake, didn't catch his eye. Nothing felt right. Every morning, he woke up in this big, expensive apartment, but it felt empty. Like there was something missing. The expensive espresso machine in his kitchen hummed, but he didn't care enough to let it fill his cup. His closet was filled with perfect suits, but even the suits felt wrong. Everything in his life was perfect, except for one thing, his heart. For years, he had been thinking about one promise. A promise he made when he was 10 years old, hungry and alone on the streets. "I'll marry you when I'm rich." He made that promise to Victoria. She had fed him, when no one else would. She gave him her lunch every day for 6 months. She didn't know it at the time, but that one small act of kindness had changed his life. She saved him, not with money, but with a simple sandwich. Now years later, he was rich. But that didn't matter. What mattered was Victoria. He couldn't forget her. He had spent years searching for her. He hired investigators. He bought up buildings near Lincoln Elementary, hoping she was still out there, helping people like she always did. But all of it was in vain. No one knew where she was. Her name was too common. And with no new leads, Isaiah started to feel like he was losing hope. Still, something told him today was different. Something pulled him to the South Chicago community meeting. He didn't know why. Maybe it was a feeling. Maybe he knew deep down she was close. Somewhere. Victoria Hayes stood at the front of the community center, waiting. She was used to this, helping others, leading the charge for her community. It was what she did. She didn't expect Isaiah to show up today. She had no idea what had happened to him. He had disappeared all those years ago, just like he said he would. He promised he'd come back when he was rich. But he wasn't the one she had been waiting for. Her focus had always been on the kids in her community, the ones who needed help. Victoria had spent her life giving everything to them. It didn't matter that her own family was poor. She had learned from her grandmother that the key to life was always sharing, no matter how little you had. And that's what she did. But today, something felt different. When she saw him, she froze. Isaiah walked into the room. He was tall now, strong, dressed in a suit that clearly cost more than anything she'd ever worn. His presence filled the room. People whispered, noticing the millionaire who had just walked in. But none of that mattered to Victoria. She didn't care about his wealth or what people said. She only cared about the way he looked at her. His eyes, those same eyes from all those years ago, looked at her, and in that moment, everything changed. She hadn't seen him in years, but she knew him. It was Isaiah. She couldn't believe it. Her heart skipped a beat. Isaiah stood there, silently taking in the room. His eyes landed on hers, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. He wasn't just here for a meeting. He was here for her. Isaiah had been waiting for the right moment to speak. He couldn't take his eyes off of her, but he knew he had to focus on the task at hand. The meeting was about a new housing project. But as soon as he spoke, his words carried more weight than the project itself. "I grew up here," he said, his voice calm but full of emotion. "I know what it's like to be let down by promises." The room went quiet, everyone listening. "I'm not here to gentrify this community," Isaiah continued. "I'm here to give back. I want to create affordable housing, jobs, and build something that will help people like me. People like Victoria, who taught me what it means to help others." He paused, feeling the weight of his words. His eyes never left hers. Victoria sat there, trying to hold back the flood of emotions rushing in. She was skeptical, just like everyone else. Developers always promised things and never followed through. But there was something in Isaiah's voice, something in the way he looked at her, that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was different. Suddenly, a voice from the back of the room interrupted. "How do we know you'll keep your promises?" Victoria's heart raced. That voice, sharp, confident, was hers. She was standing too ready to ask the questions that needed to be asked. She wasn't going to let him off easy, not after all these years. Isaiah's breath caught in his throat when he heard her voice. "Victoria?" He whispered her name, his heart pounding. Isaiah couldn't breathe. For a moment, he was paralyzed, his heart racing as his eyes locked onto Victoria. She was standing there, her expression a mix of surprise, suspicion, and disbelief. It had been 22 years. Victoria had been the one person who had cared, who had seen him when no one else did. She had given him food when he had nothing, and it felt like all of those memories, that promise came rushing back in an instant. His voice was barely a whisper. "Victoria, is it really you?" She stared at him, her eyes wide, trying to place the man standing before her. The man who, in her memory, had been a sick, hungry child. But this Isaiah, this man, was nothing like the boys she had helped. He was strong, confident, and dressed in a suit that clearly cost more than she made in a year. I don't understand," she whispered. Her heart was beating fast, a mix of emotions threatening to spill over. You're the one—" "The boy from the fence." Isaiah nodded, a small tear escaping his eye. "I've been looking for you. For years. I promised I would come back when I was rich, and I never stopped looking for you. I had to find you." Victoria's breath caught in her throat as she took a step back, not sure what to say. The flood of emotions hit her all at once: surprise, confusion, and something else. Hope. The room had grown quiet as everyone watched them. No one knew what to say, but their eyes were fixed on Isaiah and Victoria. Dorothy, the community board president, could sense the change in the atmosphere. She quickly stepped forward, trying to regain control of the meeting. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice loud enough to break the silence. "We need to get back to the meeting. We're here to discuss the community development." His attention was solely on Victoria. "I know I'm late," he said, his voice breaking, "but this is important." Victoria's hand went to her chest, clutching the locket she had worn for years. Inside, she still had the other half of the red ribbon Isaiah had tied around her wrist all those years ago. She could feel it, the memory of that day when she had promised him she would wait. She didn't know what to feel. The boy who had once been so fragile was now standing before her, rich and successful, but still holding on to the promise they had made. "I've spent 5 years searching for you," Isaiah continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd bought buildings, hired investigators, but nothing worked. And yet, here you are. After all this time, you're still helping people just like you always did." Victoria shook her head, trying to process it all. "I had to help. I couldn't just leave you out there, but I didn't think you'd ever come back. I thought you'd forget." Isaiah smiled sadly. "I never forgot you, Victoria. I couldn't. Every day, I thought about the sandwich, the way you looked at me, the way you cared when no one else did. And now I'm here, not just for the promise, but because I want to give back to this community. To you." Victoria felt her heart soften. The cold wall she had built around her for years, the one that kept her from expecting anything from Isaiah, began to crack. Maybe he had changed, maybe he hadn't forgotten. But she still didn't know what to think. She paused for a long moment before finally speaking. "You're here now," she said, her voice steady. "But what do you want from me?" Isaiah didn't hesitate. "I want to make things right. I want to build something that matters. I've spent my life chasing success, but none of it means anything without meaning. I want to create a place where people like us, like you, can have a future. A future that isn't just about money or status. It's about real, lasting change." The room remained still, the tension between them palpable. Isaiah's gaze never wavered from Victoria, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It was just the two of them, standing in the middle of the community center, where their lives had unknowingly crossed paths years ago. The weight of their past, their promise, and their separate lives hung in the air. Victoria had given so much of herself, but could she trust him now? Could she trust that he wasn't just here for something else, something more selfish? She looked down at the red ribbon still tied around his wrist, the one she had given him all those years ago. It had faded, just like the memories had faded over the years. But it was still there, still intact. "I've been waiting for you," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "But you're not the same person." "Neither am I," Isaiah nodded, understanding. "I know. But I'm still the boy who needed you. I'm still the boy who owes you everything. I want to give back. I want to help. Not just with this project, but with everything. I want to make sure no one ever feels invisible again, the way I did." Victoria felt her heart crack open. There was something real in his words, something that told her this wasn't about money. This was about the kindness she had shown him, and how it had changed both of their lives. As Isaiah reached out, gently touching her hand, the room seemed to fade away. The world outside didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the promise they had made, the connection they still shared. "Victoria," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I kept my promise. I'm here." And in that moment, she knew. She knew they were both here for a reason, for each other. If this story is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Let us know where you're watching from and share this with someone who might need a little hope today. Isaiah couldn't take his eyes off of Victoria. The years had passed, but in that one moment, it was as though time had folded back on itself. He remembered the boy he had been, the boy who had stood there hungry and afraid. And here she was, Victoria, standing in front of him. She hadn't changed much, but everything about her presence felt like a whisper from his past. The room around them was buzzing with murmurs, but it didn't matter. Isaiah's heart raced, not with excitement, but with something deeper, something that felt like an apology wrapped in a promise. He had been searching for this moment for years. 5 years of searching. The promise he had made to her all those years ago, the promise he had never forgotten, hung in the air between them. But could she believe him? Could she trust him after all this time? She had spent 22 years believing in that promise, hoping for his return, yet afraid to let herself truly believe it would happen. And now that he was here, she didn't know what to think. Her hand instinctively reached up to touch the locket around her neck, the one that held the other half of the ribbon she had tied around his wrist. It was a simple thing, but it meant everything. She remembered. She remembered every detail of those days, each one she spent feeding him, talking to him, trying to make sure he knew he wasn't alone. But now, here he was. A millionaire. A businessman. And she couldn't help but wonder if his return was more about redemption than love. "Why now?" she asked, her voice steady but carrying the weight of a question that had been lingering for decades. "Why come back now that you have everything? Why now that you've made it?" Isaiah's gaze softened. "I've spent years chasing success, Victoria, but none of it meant anything. Nothing I built mattered because I didn't have you. I didn't have the one person who made me feel like I mattered." The room fell silent. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It wasn't just about affordable housing or development. It was about something much deeper. Isaiah wasn't just looking for forgiveness. He wasn't just trying to right his wrongs. He was looking for something more, something real. Victoria's heart wavered. She had spent so much time convincing herself she didn't need Isaiah, that the world didn't owe her anything. She had created her own space in the world, and she had been proud of that. But here he was, asking her to believe that he hadn't forgotten her, that he had kept his promise. "Do you really think it's that simple?" she asked softly. Do you think I can just forgive you just because you came back with a ribbon and a promise? Isaiah stepped closer, his voice quiet. No, I don't expect you to forgive me just like that. But I want you to see that I'm not the same person. I've changed. I'm here to give back, to do something that matters. And I want to do that with you. Not just because I owe you, but because you taught me something that no amount of money or success could ever replace. You taught me that kindness is everything. That love is what makes the difference. Victoria didn't respond at first. She just stared at him, her mind racing. She had lived for so long in the belief that her sacrifices were her own, that they didn't need recognition. She had always believed that no one would ever understand the small, quiet acts of kindness that had shaped her life. And yet, here was Isaiah, telling her that everything she had done mattered. He wasn't asking for her to forgive him. He wasn't asking for her to love him again. He was asking for a chance, just a chance to show her that the boy she had helped had turned into a man who understood what it meant to give. The air between them was heavy with emotion. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if I can believe that you're really here for the right reasons. Isaiah's heart sank, but he didn't give up. I understand. I know I've broken promises before, but I've never broken the one I made to you. I promised I'd come back, and I will. Not because I'm rich, but because you showed me what it means to care for others. Victoria looked down, her eyes on the ribbon he still wore, a faded reminder of the connection they once shared. She thought about the years she had spent working in the community, helping kids who had no one else. She thought about the sacrifices she had made, how she had given everything for people she didn't even know, just like she had given to Isaiah all those years ago. Okay, she said quietly. I'll give you a chance, but you have to prove it. Prove that this isn't just about your guilt. Prove that you're really here to help. Isaiah nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders. I will, I promise. As the meeting came to an end, Isaiah and Victoria walked out together. The promise that had once seemed impossible now felt like a real future, one that they could build together. Isaiah had kept his word. But this time, it wasn't just about the promise he had made as a child. It was about something much more powerful. It was about two people who had been brought together by kindness, by shared history, and by the desire to make the world better for others. Together, they were going to do that. It had been 2 weeks since Isaiah's promise. 2 weeks since he and Victoria had stood side by side, quietly deciding that, despite the years that had passed, they would face the future together. But in that time, things hadn't moved as fast as Isaiah had hoped. The weight of what he wanted to do, what he promised to do, was heavier than he expected. They had talked endlessly about the community center, about affordable housing, and how to rebuild trust in a neighborhood that had seen far too many broken promises. But every day, as Isaiah worked late into the night, the one question still lingered in his mind: was this really enough? Isaiah had the resources, the power, the money. But he didn't have what Victoria had. He didn't have the trust of the people, the bond that came from years of sacrifice. Victoria was the one who truly understood this neighborhood. She knew what it meant to give when you had nothing, to fight for people who had no one else. She didn't need the recognition, the applause. She needed to see real change happen, one life at a time, and Isaiah wasn't sure if he could give her that. Victoria sat at her small desk in the community center, her fingers tapping gently on the wood. She had spent the last few years fighting for the kids aging out of the foster care system, making sure they had a place to go, a chance to make it in the world. It was exhausting work, and sometimes it felt like she was the only one who cared. She looked up as Isaiah entered the room, his usual confident stride now slightly more hesitant. I've been thinking, he began, about everything we talked about. The housing, the jobs, the community center. I want to make this happen. I want to make it happen for real. Victoria didn't respond immediately. She studied him, taking in the tiredness in his eyes, the slight slump in his shoulders. She could tell he was tired of talking, tired of waiting. Okay, she said slowly, but what does that look like to you? Isaiah paused, as if searching for the right words. I've been meeting with developers, architects. We've got plans for the buildings, the apartments. The whole thing, it's mapped out. But I know that's not enough. I need your help, your vision. What we do, it has to be something real, not just a building with a sign on it. Something that lasts. Something that changes lives. Victoria stood up and walked toward the window, her fingers brushing against the curtain. Outside, the neighborhood stretched out, a place that had been forgotten by too many. But not by her. Not by Isaiah anymore. Real change, she repeated, as though testing the words on her lips. I've been fighting for real change my whole life. But change isn't just about buildings and programs. It's about people, real people. People who need a place to belong. A place where they don't feel invisible. Isaiah nodded, understanding finally beginning to sink in. So, what do we need to do? Later that afternoon, they stood together in the center of a rundown building that had once been the heart of the neighborhood. The windows were cracked, the walls peeling. The floors were covered in dust, and the air smelled stale, like something forgotten. Isaiah felt a pang in his chest as he surveyed the space. This was what he had been fighting for, what he had been chasing. Not just buildings, not just plans, but people. Real people. Victoria's voice broke through his thoughts. This, she said softly, this is what we can fix. But not with more money, not with more fancy projects. With time, with care. Isaiah turned to face her. You mean with me? She smiled, a small, knowing smile. I mean with all of us. But you can't do it alone. You need people who care. People who've lived through it. Isaiah looked around the space again, his heart beginning to race with a new kind of hope. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe it wasn't just about money. It was about trust. It was about building something that would last. Something built on a foundation of real love and care. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Isaiah and Victoria met daily, planning, building, and talking to people in the community. Together, they set up job training programs, housing assistance, and food banks. Isaiah threw his resources into the project, but it was Victoria's voice that guided the way. They were partners in every sense of the word. Each day, they saw the impact they were having, small as it was, but real. Kids who had no future were signing up for the job training program. Families who had been on the verge of eviction were moving into the new affordable housing. The community center began to come alive again, the walls once again filled with laughter and hope. But with each success came new challenges. There were always more obstacles, more people to convince, more doors to open. And at times it felt like they would never get it all done. Victoria worked tirelessly. But even she had moments where she wanted to give up. But every time, Isaiah was there, beside her, reminding her why they started. Reminding her that together they could change everything. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Victoria and Isaiah stood outside the community center, watching the people as they went about their evening. There was laughter in the air. Children played in the yard. The elderly sat on benches, chatting with their neighbors. Isaiah turned to Victoria, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. This is real. This is what we've been building for. Victoria's heart swelled as she watched the scene before her. She had always believed in this community. But now she could see the hope, the change, and the love that had grown from that one small promise all those years ago. It's just the beginning, she said softly, her eyes glistening. We have so much more to do. Isaiah nodded, his hand finding hers. Together, they stood in silence for a moment, their hands intertwined, knowing that the road ahead would be long, but that they were finally on the right path. It had been a year since Isaiah and Victoria first reconnected. A year filled with hard work, setbacks, growth, and breakthroughs. A year that had started with a promise and turned into something much greater. The community center was thriving now, with programs running for job training, mental health support, and affordable housing. Isaiah's company had become more than just a business. It had become a force for good in the neighborhood, but there was still so much more to do. Isaiah sat in the office, his mind racing as he looked over the new plans. His phone buzzed with another email, another proposal, another meeting. But today it felt different. Today, as he looked at the work they had done together, he knew this was the beginning of something far bigger than just a project. This was the start of a movement, of a community that would rise together. Across the room, Victoria was working with a group of young people. She was always surrounded by them, teaching, guiding, listening. She was a lifeline for so many, and she never let go of that responsibility. Isaiah watched her, his heart swelling with pride. She had built this. Together, they had built this. But as much as the work was important, what mattered more was the bond they had formed. It wasn't just about the buildings or the programs. It was about the people they were helping, the trust they were building, and the hope they were giving back. As Victoria approached his desk, her eyes tired but bright with determination, Isaiah knew they were both on the same page. Where do we go from here? She asked, taking a seat across from him. Isaiah looked out the window, his gaze focused on the horizon. The city was sprawling, full of promise, but it wasn't perfect yet. There were still kids to help, families to lift, lives to change. But they had started something that would last far beyond them. "We keep going," he said quietly. "We keep going, one step at a time. We build more, we help more. We make sure no one feels invisible, no one feels alone." "Not like I did." Victoria smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the same fierce determination. "We do this together, Isaiah." For them, for a moment they sat in silence, the weight of their journey hanging between them. But it wasn't a weight of regret, it was a weight of purpose, of a mission that had finally begun to take shape. Months passed, and the Red Ribbon Initiative continued to grow. More cities adopted the program. More lives were touched. More people were given a second chance, just like Isaiah had been. The success was undeniable, and the impact was real. Isaiah and Victoria were no longer just dreamers. They were changemakers. The story of a boy saved by a sandwich, a promise made, and a love rekindled had become a story of transformation, not just for them, but for an entire community. One evening, they stood outside the community center, watching the lights flicker on as the sun set behind the buildings. Isaiah pulled out the red ribbon he still wore, the one Victoria had given him all those years ago. He had carried it with him, just like he had carried the promise he made. "You kept your promise," Victoria said softly, her voice filled with pride. "I did," Isaiah replied, his voice steady. "And I couldn't have done it without you." She smiled, her hand finding his. "It wasn't just you, Isaiah. It was us. We built this. Together. And that was the truth of it. This wasn't just about one person's success or redemption. This was about a partnership, about two people who believed in each other, and about a community that believed in the power of kindness. They had taken their pain, their struggles, and their pasts, and they had turned them into something beautiful. They had built a future where no one was left behind, a future where promises were kept, and a future where love, hope, and kindness reigned. The journey that Isaiah and Victoria went through wasn't easy. There were setbacks, disappointments, and moments when they both felt like giving up. But the one thing that kept them going was the belief that giving up was never an option. They had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the simplest acts of kindness. In the darkest of times, one small act, one simple promise can change everything. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to have all the answers. What you need is the willingness to take that first step, to give what you can, and to trust that what you give will come back in ways you can't even imagine. Isaiah's promise to Victoria was about more than love. It was about making a difference in the world, one person at a time. It was about remembering that no one is invisible, that everyone matters, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change the course of someone's life. If you've been moved by Isaiah and Victoria's journey, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future stories. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what you think about this story. Let's keep spreading love, kindness, and hope together. Your support helps us grow, and your voice matters. Remember, no matter how difficult things may seem, never forget that giving up is never an option. One small act of kindness can change the world.